Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Step-by-Step Transition from Manual to Automated Testing. My name is Jon Reynolds. I'm a product manager here at Ranorex, and I will be your presenter for today. Before we begin, I do have a couple of housekeeping announcements to make. All attendees will be kept on mute throughout the entire webinar, so if you have any questions, please ask them using the questions panel of the GoToWebinar console. Feel free to ask these questions at any time, as we will be answering questions throughout the webinar through this console. We do tend to get a number of questions at the very end, so if you have a question early in the webinar, please don't hesitate to ask it so you have a better chance of getting your question answered in time before the webinar ends. This webinar is also being recorded, so if you need to leave the webinar for any reason, or any of your teammates registered for the webinar, you should receive a link to the webinar within about 48 hours after the webinar ends. You can also share this link with anyone on your team who may be interested who did not register themselves. So the agenda for today, I'm going to cover an introduction to automated testing and cover some barriers and other topics around automation in general. Then we will look at how you can evaluate your current processes to determine where you need to automate, set some achievable targets for starting an automation project, choosing the right tool or tools for your automation project, then prioritize your automation and your tests as you work through your automation project, and then some practices to help set you up for long-term success. Following the webinar, we will also have some live Q&A for any unanswered questions that we did not get through or that we find interesting, which would be great to answer live in the webinar. So first, let's take a look at automation in general. So why would you want to automate? The main purpose behind automation is increasing efficiency. And this doesn't always necessarily mean automated tests, but for this webinar, we're going to focus on test automation. So why would you automate? You want to increase efficiency. You want to execute more tests and see results faster. Automated testing also helps you increase test coverage by allowing your testers to focus on areas which are more important to test manually. This also helps you reduce repetitive tasks done manually. So where your testers would be performing the same tests over and over again on different browsers or operating systems, or doing data input into your system, automating some of these tasks helps your testers really focus on items which aren't as repetitive and which require more of a human interaction and manual inputs for your testing. So let's take a look at the quote on the right here. Program testing can be used to show the presence of bugs, but never to show their absence. So this means that no matter how much you test, you cannot be certain that your program or application does not contain bugs. But the more you test, the more confident you are that you release a stable product that is free of most bugs or doesn't have any major bugs which are going to cause severe problems for your customers. The more you test, the more confident you become, and automated testing is a way to test more without putting a bottleneck on waiting for all of your tests to complete. So automated tests can be run in parallel to your manual testing processes and allow you to test more and cover more of your product and focus on very important areas. So we recently polled a number of technology leaders and asked for the top 3 barriers to automating your UI or GUI tests. Now these barriers can also relate to any kind of automation, but the barriers that we got back were cost. So it's a common notion that automating tools, UI tools, or any automation is expensive. the tools are expensive, or free tools that are out there have way too much overhead and require extra developers or maintenance to keep them up and running. So the idea of cost or expense comes down to perspective. How much does a bug actually cost you if it's released to production? Now, I'm not saying that automation is going to prevent every bug from reaching production, but if it helps you catch a couple of bugs that may have cost you $3,000 to $5,000 in support labor, lost revenue, you lose a couple of customers, then a few $1,000s extra on an automation tool doesn't sound so bad. And then also, automation tools can help you increase your test coverage. So if you're able to increase test coverage by 10 to 20%, it's a cost savings compared to increasing your actual QA staff. So where do you want to eat the cost? Do you want to eat the cost in less testing and releasing maybe probably a few more bugs to production, or do you want to eat the cost up front and not have negative reviews on your website, your forums, external forums? Do you want to keep your reputation strong and just pay a little extra money to increase your test coverage? Another barrier that was identified was the lack of automation experience by testers. A lot of testers, especially manual testers, are generally manual testers because they may not be familiar with automation scripts, may not be able to write automation scripts, and a lot of automation tools may require a good amount of development experience or coding experience. But there are plenty of tools out there with no code or low code solutions, codes that or solutions that run on natural language processing. So if you just type in click on this button, it will go click on that button for you. There are a lot of automation tools out there that don't require automation experience or scripting experience, which this can help you get your foot in the door with automation. And some of the tools which offer, say, a hybrid solution where they offer both a no-code and fully coded or mix of code and no-code or low-code, those tools can be used to help get your testers more familiar with some automation and scripting so they can start to grow as testers and learn a little bit of automation. The next barrier that on this list, with about 30% of our survey respondents indicating is a problem, is there's not enough time in the development cycle. Either you don't have enough time to start an automation project, or you don't want to slow down your delivery speed. And I mentioned this earlier where automation testing is something that you can run in parallel. Once you get your automation up and running, you can have your automation running on a separate virtual machine or other platforms while you're doing your manual tests, and your automation is probably going to finish before you're done with your manual testing. So the main hurdle is you have to set aside time to start your project, because once the project is implemented, it's probably not going to be slowing you down. Another problem that people express with automation is that it can be flaky and unreliable. If you change your interface, there's too much maintenance to go through and rewrite your tests or update all of your tests so that you can continue testing with your new interface or where buttons have moved. This comes down to some of the tools you may be using and how you're implementing your automation. We'll get to some tips and tricks or other practices to help with minimizing maintenance down the road. But there are a number of tools which offer reusable modules or a central repository of elements that help you reduce maintenance. So you only need to update your module or your element instead of having to go in and rewrite all of your tests. All you need to do is update an element that test is looking at. And there are other ways to help, with flaky and unreliable tests. but well-written tests with strong tools aren't as flaky as they may seem. The final item is internal resistance. Now, there are other items on this poll that were brought up, but internal resistance is another item where you have people internally who are afraid that automation is going to cost them their jobs, or they think that the processes in place are fine and don't need to be updated. You need to work through that where automation isn't going to replace your manual testers or your other testers on your team. Automation is a tool to help your testers focus on items where they need to focus. So instead of doing redundant tests, which are the same with every single release, they can focus on doing the more acceptance testing, more interface testing where they can actually get a good look at what is in front of them and understand whether or not it looks good. Because automation isn't at the point where it's going to tell you that this website looks really good. It may tell you everything is there, but to know whether or not it looks really good, that's something totally different. There is a human perspective on things that is needed with testers. There are judgment calls that you just want to put on a person and not on your automated tool. So now that we've covered some just general topics around transitioning to automation, let's look at what are the first steps of actually starting the transition. As a team, you need to evaluate your current processes and where you need to improve. So what are your bottlenecks in testing? Are you constantly, after a build is ready, are you waiting for it to be deployed to, say, a staging server before you can test it, and then it takes testers a few days to go through and do all of the tests they need? Where are the bottlenecks in your testing processes? You also need to take a look at how your errors are reaching production. So if you have bugs that reach your production code, take a look at those and really look at what they're costing you. How significant are these errors? You're lucky if they're all just minor errors with simple workarounds, but generally, there will be bugs which are problems that you need to hop on and fix immediately. So look at these errors objectively in these bugs and determine if you had, say, a little more test coverage, a little more time to focus on those areas, could they have been caught? Another item to look at is you have to identify the problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to just reduce the amount of time you spend manual testing, to reduce the time it takes to release something out to the market, or make something generally available? Or are you trying to increase product stability? Are you trying to have better coverage of your API? What are you trying to accomplish as you transition and start with automated testing? We talked about the barriers just a moment ago. How can you break through some of these barriers? What do you need to do? Who do you need to talk to get a champion on your team to lead this process? And another item is, do you need more than just a test automation tool? You may be in the market for a test automation tool, but are you using Excel for your manual tests? Do you need to switch and implement a test case management tool? Do you need a requirements management tool or a bug tracking tool or a reporting dashboard? What else do you need what else might you need to complement your test automation? For test automation, what are your available resources? Do you have enough devices or virtual machines or people to carry out automated testing? And who will lead this automated testing transition? Will it be a team of people, stakeholders, developers, QA staff? Who will be leading this transition as you start implementing your automated tests? And finally, you need to identify what you want to automate first. The end goal may be to automate 70%, 100% of your tests. But you have to start somewhere. So identify some low-hanging fruit for some test cases that you want to automate first. Where are you spending the most time on your manual testing for repetitive tests, such as cross-browser tests? Can you automate these? Uh, what are some high-risk areas that you want to make sure are tested every single time you do a build? Can those high-risk areas be automated? Does the application start? That can be automated. Just after an update, does it build correctly and will it install? These are the type of things that you can automate, but you have to identify where you want to start. So after you've evaluated your processes, you want to set some goals. So these are goals for your automation project as you get started. So what is your definition of automated testing? Is it just scripts that perform certain tests? Is it a full UI automation? How are you trying to automate? Are you trying to just automate your API? So look at what your goal is. So what are you going to automate, and what do you want the results to be? What problems are you trying to solve by automating? And then what are your objectives for the project? So as you start the project, as I mentioned a moment ago, is your objective to have 500 tests or so many hours of automated tests, or covering certain key areas? Define what you want to get out of your automation. And then how did your automation objectives support your overall testing goals? Are you trying to reduce the number of bugs that reach production? Are you trying to have greater visibility into your testing? Do you want more concrete test results and reports that you can look at and have faith that those reports are correct? So your overall testing goals, does this project support those goals? And then how does manual testing fit in? So when you are implementing automation, you're still going to be doing manual testing. Even after you have an automation suite up and running that's performing well and doing all of your regression tests, you're still going to be doing manual testing. There are tasks that you can't automate. They're one-time tasks, or they're just very complex and they have a lot of dependencies that you're just not going to automate. So you will still have manual testing as part of your process. And then what is your expectation of test coverage with automation? This is similar to the other question. So how much are you looking to grow your test coverage? Are you looking to add an X number of tests or cover certain areas? What are you trying to do? And finally, perform an ROI analysis. So calculate your return on investment from your automation suite. On the Ranorex website, we do have an ROI template that will help you calculate and gather some numbers and get a forecast for your ROI. And to give you an idea of return on investment you can expect, around 80% of Ranorex customers report that they've seen a 20 to 40% increase in productivity after adopting test automation. So a 20 to 40% increase in productivity after adopting test automation sounds like a pretty good return. But you need to do an ROI analysis to determine, how much your bugs are costing you, what it costs to implement automation, because there are costs associated with automation for how many VMs do you need? Do you need to spin up virtual machines on the fly, or you will need some supporting architecture to run automation. But there are also cloud services that, those costs may be included in the cloud service or whatever tool that you purchase. So some tools may already provide those extra items out of the box, so you don't need to do extra calculations on, the architecture or supporting devices that you may think you need. So now that after you set some goals for your automated project, you need to choose some tools for evaluating. So identify what tools you want to evaluate, and you want to evaluate more than one. You want to do a few. Um, so before you start choosing your tools, create a plan. So how will you measure your success with these tools? Uh, are you looking at being able to write X number of tests in a certain amount of time? Are you looking at some feedback from your testers on how easy it was to use the tool? It, are you getting reliable results? There are a number of metrics that you could use to evaluate uh, how you like each tool and how well it fits your company. Um, and what are the project deliverables? So when evaluating a tool or multiple tools, um, what are you looking to provide at the end of your evaluation? You know, deliver a project that shows you what you've implemented and your automation um, that provides you with something that shows what you implemented. And then how will this automation project affect other deadlines? Investing in an automation project is likely going to take your staff, your testers, away from other duties. So how much will this affect those other duties, and do you have the time to do this? You have to set aside time to get the automation because the return on investment in the long run is worth it. Um, will you maintain a centralized repository of test cases or your test script? So if you're doing a lot of automation scripts, where will you maintain your repository of information? Will this be on GitHub, or will you have a local server, a file share that has different scripts? You need to determine where you are going to maintain your test cases. And where will your automation team be located? Will it be a variety of people in the same office? Will it be people scattered remote around the world? Uh, because how the team is structured will uh, be affected by where you maintain your automation scripts. So you would need some kind of central location to be able to distribute your automation to multiple people or for collaboration purposes. And then where and when will training occur? So will you be doing remote training? Will you be doing training with the tools support staff? Do they provide professional services? Do you need to hire a professional service to do your training for your testers as you implement these automated tools? There will be some ramp up for your testers to get familiar with automated tools for whoever will be doing the automation. So now that you've thought about how you want to evaluate your tools, uh, you need to select which tools you're going to look at. So there are tools that provide full programming languages, whether they're free or paid. You have things like PyTest, Selenium. There are a variety of other tools which provide an IDE. So are you going to be using a full scripting language or a full programming language? Or will you be focusing on more of a user interface to perform your tests? Will you be doing a lot of UI testing? Which type of tool do you need to do your automated testing? Or are you looking for tools which will facilitate collaboration, including reusable objects, source control for your test cases? Uh, look for tools that provide you with the collaboration needs that meet your team's needs. If your team has very little automation experience, do you need to look at tools with codeless solution so your testers don't have to be programmers to do automation? Do you use specific frameworks such as BDD or data-driven tests? Is there something specific that this tool needs to offer to support how you test your application? And then finally, your automation tools should be independent of your application. So you don't you should choose a tool that doesn't have to be tied into your application. You want to be able to have your tests separate from your automated tool or from your tool so that you're not having to have your tests tied too closely to the actual code of your product. And then an automation tool that allows you to test outside of your application under test also provides you maybe with the opportunity to do other things with your automation, such as some process automation. So not necessarily testing an application, but you could use it elsewhere in the organization to automate other tasks that you may not think to do at the moment. So now that you've chosen your tools to evaluate, you want to conduct a proof of concept. So for your proof of concept, you want to spend a few weeks evaluating the tools you've selected. You probably don't want to do each tool all at the same time. You want to focus one tool at a time, automate some tests using that tool, and take a lot of notes. Automate some core tests, some smoke tests to make sure that your application is stable. And then do some automation from an end-to-end test to verify that the tool you selected is compatible with your application from end to end. You won't be able to set up a test for everything, but an end-to-end test from login to log out and a few tasks in between will help you identify compatibility with your application and determine whether or not there may be some elements in your application which whatever you're evaluating can't work with. Then set up integrations with your other key tools that you use in your organization, whether it's requirements management, bug tracking, your CI/CD pipeline. Make sure that you can use this automated tool with other key tools in your organization. And then utilize some source control for your automation code. If you are writing manual scripts or using a code-based automated tool, make sure that you have source control because you do not want to lose work that's stored on just a single machine. You want it backed up on a GitHub or Azure or wherever you are running your automation or wherever you store your source code for your application under test. You also want to have a repository for your automation code as well. And when you're evaluating the tool, determine whether or not you have enough documentation and support. Are there helpful guides to help your team implement tests that you need to test? Are you able to intuitively use this tool to start testing, or do you need support? And if you need support, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but can you get that support from the tool? Do they provide you with some training, hands-on training, or tutorials, or webinars, or something to help your team get going? And then, after you've evaluated the tool and created some tests, how does each tool measure against your evaluation criteria? Where do the tools line up? Do you need to evaluate another tool? Do you need to pause it for a bit while you address other deadlines you need to address and then come back and then evaluate them? You don't have to immediately choose a tool. You may have chosen 3 tools, which after you use them, they're not what you want. So don't be afraid to say, I need to go back and I want to look at a couple more tools because these might not be what I want after you get your hands into a product. Sometimes you never know what you want until you realize what you don't want. Decide on the tools which are best for your organization. And if you're buying multiple tools, do they play well together? Can you submit your automated results over to your test case management tool? If you find a bug in your automated tool, will it create a bug? Or if you find a bug using your automated tests, will it create a bug in, say, Jira for you or Azure DevOps? Or do you have to go in and look at your automated report and then go in and manually create a test? These are things to keep in mind also. Does it fit in your organization's suite of tools? And then once you've chosen a tool, you're going to need to train the rest of your automation team on these tools. So do you need to hire professional service, or does someone in your team already have experience with it that can do the training in-house? So determine how you are going to train your other staff or the rest of your automation team on these new tools and processes that you're choosing to implement. And now that you've chosen a tool, you want to start actually automating your tests. So start small. Choose the tests that will give you the greatest return on investment. And these are most likely going to be your repetitive tests, your time-consuming, tedious tests with with less margin for error, but easy to automate. So if you have a test that just performs a login, automate it. If you have a test that focuses on data entry and you're feeding in, or if you have a manual tester who's just copying and pasting data from a spreadsheet into your tool, these are the kind of things that should be automated so that you can then just validate your results. Automate the tasks which require very repetitive actions. As I've mentioned multiple times, the cross-browser, cross-platform. So if you have to test on Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and Edge, you have the same set of tests to run 4 times. But now if you need to also test across Android, iOS, Windows, and Unix, you now have 16 combinations of the same tests to run. Then if you throw in, say, 3 different screen sizes for, say, a phone, a tablet, and a laptop, you've now got 48 different combinations of the same set of tests to run. And this is where automation is, a lifesaver, because you can cover all of those different scenarios just by feeding in some data into your tool, into your automation script. So it can automatically generate tests for all of those different platforms that you need to do. Another thing to evaluate is, do a risk analysis. Where are tests in your test suite? Which tests are failing the most? Which tests, if they fail, need to be fixed immediately? Which areas provide the greatest risk to your revenue or the stability of your product? If it's an internal tool, which tests must pass? And automate them so that you can get those tested early and often and with every build so that they're not missed and you can fix them quickly if something comes up. Then as you're doing your tests, iterate through your tests. Iterate through them in different orders. Run tests from, in different sequences if possible, and that will help you identify whether or not some tests may depend on others, and you want to try to minimize those dependencies, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Another item is just refactor. So if you're doing a lot of code, refactor often and early. It will save you time down the road so you don't hit a suite of a few thousand tests and then you have to go in and refactor and do a major overhaul of your automation suite to make it easier to maintain. Do the maintenance up front. So in that, doing the maintenance up front ties into some long-term success. So maintaining and expanding your automated tests. As I mentioned, iterate. So go through your tests frequently just to keep them, look at them. You don't have to adjust them or maintain them every time they run, but look at your results and make sure that your results are accurate. Don't just always take the automated suite for its word. Look at your results and compare some, do some spot checking, just to make sure your tests are running as expected. As I mentioned a moment ago, refactor often. Remove dependencies and create reusable modules. So try not to have tests that are contingent on other tests where possible. So yes, you may have to be logged into a system to be able to perform another test, but try not to have tests which are just which are dependent on a variety of other preconditions, try to make your tests as distinct as possible. And reusable modules are key. This is available with a lot of tools. I can't speak right now, but reusable modules, they are very important so that, say, you have a submit button, which is common throughout your application. You shouldn't be defining that submit button everywhere it appears. You should have one definition of a submit button, of that specific button, and just reference it throughout your automated tests. That way, if you change the color or the style of that button or the location, then you don't have to go in and edit every single test. You should just be able to edit that one module, one element, and that will make maintenance down the road a lot better. And I can't reiterate this enough, that a little refactoring early will save you a lot of time later. So keep an eye on where you can improve your tests over time, so you don't end up down the road with a multi-month or many week project going through and trying to fix automation tests because somebody moved something or something changed. So keeping your tests, keeping these items in mind where unique tests with reusable modules, refactoring often will save you a lot of time. Another key item is to test your tests. As I mentioned a moment ago, look at the results. Are your tests producing the results that you expect? If you tweak your result to create a fail, if you tweak your test to fail, is it going to fail? Check on your tests once in a while, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. So these items should help set you up for long-term success as you grow and switch from a manual process into a mix of manual and automation. So this webinar isn't just about dropping manual testing and jumping into automation. You need to transition into a combination of both. Because automated testing isn't going to replace your manual testers. It's supposed to be a tool to help your manual testers identify and do the tests which are very important to your team, which are hard to automate, and also get a set of human eyes on your product. So with all of that being said, all of my talking here, let's look at some Q&A and see what kind of questions some of our attendees may have. All right, so not a lot of questions so far. I hope that I've been pretty clear in my presentation. We do have a recent question from Liana. We mentioned that not all manual test cases will be automated, and we will still be creating more manual tests. What do we do with them? So the goal here is to automate the tests which are repetitive, redundant, or even very critical tests, so that when your manual tests can be focused on, say, you roll out a new feature, you're likely going to manually test that first, get your acceptance testing, so you can focus on testing your new features, your new functionality, getting your acceptance, or your getting an eye on your product. And then as that feature becomes incorporated in your product, you can then work on automating that. So you start rolling your regression tests into your automation suite, but you continue to manually test items that you can't automate, whether they're the first time the feature appears, so it's harder to automate, or they're just very difficult to automate in general. So a test with a lot of complex steps or setup that, or some things that are a little harder to do via an automation suite. So trying to just drag elements off your user interface, or doing random smoke testing or exploratory testing, which is better suited for a manual process. So you will keep your the manual tests that you're going to continue to test manually, but you will start transitioning the other tests over to an automated suite. And a question earlier about, maintaining from Liana as well, maintaining 2 test case repositories. You will likely, yes, have 2 sets of test cases. They can be stored in the same suite or same tool if you are using a product that covers both, or if your automated tool syncs up to your test case management tool. Like with Ranorex, we'll sync up with TestRail and store your automated test results and sync up your test cases with TestRail. But you will still be using a separate tool to actually do your automation and maintain those tests. The data may be synced into something like TestRail for visibility, but you will likely still have 2 separate sets, and it does make sense to have 2 separate suites or repositories for your tests. If you're a manual tester, start looking for test cases in a repository and it's got a bunch of automation code or other things that may throw off your manual testers. So keeping them distinct can make sense in a lot of cases. So we have a question from Beryl, I believe is the name. What sort of backend tests can be automated? We've done API test automation so far, but what else can be done in regards to backend development? So on the backend, you can start doing some code scanning, penetration testing in the backend. So you can use a lot of security testing through the backend. You can also run unit tests inside your code. So there are various things that you can do before you get into, say, your UI testing if you have a user interface. So there are a lot of things you can do on the back end to automate. You can also do regular just maintenance scans or checking monitoring to make sure that your system is still up and running. So these are items that you can automate in the back end and still, to keep an eye on your product. So you set up alerts if, say, just even a health check fails, you can start automating those alerts or automate your health checks. Let's look here. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through some more questions. We have a few questions kind of hopping in here. What type of metrics or indicators do you recommend to have regarding test coverage, critical tests that could help the decision-making process to either release or not a software version? This question is from Carlos. So this determining whether a bug or a test failure is, say, in some terms like a showstopper or a critical failure, that can be written into your test case or your reporting, or you can have certain alerts set up for certain test failures. But your tests can have, in a lot of tools, whether certain features or maybe not features, not the right word, but properties to indicate whether they are critical, what priority or severity these kind of tests are, so that if they do fail, it's easier to pick out the ones that are critical versus, say, a font color is a little off compared to, if a button's completely missing. So you can set up different priorities in different systems to analyze your test cases. So when you're running your reports, you can set up, like I said, just different properties to track those, but you still have to look at your failures from a product perspective or QA perspective and determine, does it prevent my product from working? Does it have a simple workaround? So how you analyze that would impact what you do with your test result. There is one question from Naomi. I kind of find this one interesting. Is it possible to automate the "Are you a human?" and reCAPTCHA checkpoints? I'm sure it is. There's probably a good amount of machine learning or AI involved in that. But I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there was, I believe, an organization out there that actually tested to show that
their robot could do it better than humans could. So I'm pretty sure that there's a resource out there to do it. All right, let's see. Is there a known or approved method of integration between Ranorex and Jira? This message is from Fred. Ranorex does have an out-of-the-box integration with Jira, which can allow you to automatically file bug reports and update bug reports based on test failures. So you should be able to find information on the integration on the Ranorex user guide. And thank you, George, for your praise. All right, questions are scrolling a little bit here. Can cloud testing also be automated? This question from Beryl as well. That question, I'm not sure if you could clarify that question or not. I'm not quite certain what you're trying to apply with cloud testing. Is it browser testing, a cloud service? Do you have a cloud API? So if you could add a little more detail to that question, that would be helpful. How often is object recognition reviewed and updated to keep up with web development? This is from Oliver. There are constant updates from tools across the spectrum on object recognition. Many tools have implemented machine learning algorithms to help identify images, or self-healing algorithms to help find objects that have moved. So there are a lot of changes across the market for trying to keep up with technology, because everything seems to be going, well, not everything, but the trend seems to be that more and more technologies are just being implemented on mobile apps using embedded frameworks, or the same, you have the same browser running, or the same web page with just different views for mobile web and mobile web and tablet. It used to be you would go to a mobile site, it would be a mobile.ranorex.com or something like that. Now it's just all the same website rendering up everything in without providing different URLs. So there's a lot that the industry is doing to keep up with all of the technology changes across different web platforms. All right, we are almost at a 50-minute mark here, so it should be about time to wrap this up. If I did not get to your specific question, we will look at the questions that went unanswered and should be sending out emails with some additional responses if we did not answer your question directly. But I do appreciate the feedback, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and thank you very much for attending.